Good evening. What a pleasure to be with you. A lot of friends and family in the audience, and then some that obviously we'll get to know. My wife is a Ray, and so she is off the same family tree as the French family, which we know and love. I've known them since 2000, and then Katie, of course, all her life. So it's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. Love one another. What a beautiful thought, right? Wide in scope and high in degree. It's a pursuit that a Christian will make his entire or her entire life. When we use the English word love, we use it for all kinds of things. I love apple pie or chocolate cake. So they say I love Olive Garden, right? I love the Longhorns or the Aggies or the Razorbacks. I love my wife. I love my children. I love hunting and fishing. All the same word, but not really all the same love. The love that we're talking tonight is captured by the Greek word agape or agapao, and it's used some 250 times. It's the highest degree of love that we know. It's a love based on choice, not on preference, not on attraction, not on obligation. We choose to love. And usually this word is not used for a love of things. It's a love of God or a love of people. When the Bible talks about loving things, like when the Pharisees were loving to hear the praises of men, that's phileo. It's a different word. Agape is about people. It's sacrificial. It's unconditional. And it's selfless. So what a perfect goal for us to consider tonight. Love one another. But it's not natural. And it's not always easy for us. It's probably why it's the last step in growing our faith. If you'll remember 2 Peter 1, 5 through 7, there's this stacking progress that goes on in the life of a Christian. And it says, add to your faith virtue, to virtue knowledge, to knowledge self-control, to self-control perseverance, and to perseverance godliness, and to godliness brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness, the last step, love. Agape. So tonight what I want us to do is to look at a couple of aspects of love, and then in the very end we'll work on an exercise of how we actually work on perfecting agape love. And the first thing is, it might be rather elementary, but the first one is love one another is commanded. It's a commandment. We don't have an option in the matter of whether we're going to do that or not. In John 13, verse 34, Jesus says, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, as I have loved you, that you also love one another. The same writer in 1 John 3:23 says, and this is his commandment, speaking of God, that we should believe on the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another as he gave us commandment. And then a few verses later in 1 John 3:11, he says it's been a message from the beginning. So it kind of contradicts a little bit the new commandment, but we'll talk about that. He said, for this is the message that you heard from the beginning, that we should love one another, not as Cain, who was of the wicked one and murdered his brother. So this commandment to love has been from the beginning. It's not a New Testament commandment. And so we'll talk about what Jesus means by that. Actually, we can look in Leviticus 19, 17 to 18. And God would make a commandment for them to love. He said, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And then 1 John 4, 7 through 11, we need to consider the source of love as it relates to being a commandment. Let's look at 1 John 4, 7 through 11 together. Beloved, let us, that would be an invitation to act. It's a shared purpose or an emphasis on collectiveness or unity. Let us love one another. For love is of God. That's the source. And everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know God, for God is love. In this, the love of God was manifested toward us, that God has sent his only begotten Son into the world, that we might live through him. And this is love. Not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. So in this idea of commandment, when he says that we ought to love one another, again, that's not optional. That's a moral obligation. It's what a person should do if that's what they believe in. And our religion is surrounded by this idea of agape love. Love is the foundation. And in this passage, it says that by our love, we show that we know God. And so if we're not going to show that love, how could we say that we know him? In the second place, love one another shows to whom we belong. And I'll direct your attention back to John 13, verses 34 and 35. Jesus said, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this, all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another." And so now we'll deal with it. A new commandment? Because we've already read, even back in Leviticus and as far back as Genesis, Cain was mentioned in this idea of loving one another. New is now Jesus in the way that he loves. So the standard that we're striving for has been elevated. That's what's new about the commandment. This is going to surpass every other commandment that they've ever had. That's why in the Sermon on the Mount, he would talk about your righteousness must exceed those of the Pharisees. And that's what he was teaching them. So how did Jesus love? If he's to give a new commandment to them and say that you love like I love you, what does that look like? You know, I'm constantly reading through the New Testament. I'm sure that you do too. And you see these characters that Jesus interacts with, and they remind us of people that are in our life. Even with the struggles and the character mishaps that they have, we're reminded of people. There are people like Peter in our life. A little bit impulsive. Maybe they act before they think. Maybe they speak before they think. Maybe they're not as loyal as we think they should be. How did Jesus interact with a person like that? Remember, Peter is the one that said, "Jesus, I'll follow you anywhere." And then he denied him 3 times. He's the one that jumped up and chopped off Malchus's ear. Right? A bit impulsive. People like this could be hard to be around, but Jesus was patient. Jesus gave him a second chance. Remember, Peter, the second chance that he got was he was able to tell Jesus, "I love you," 3 times after he had denied him 3 times. We need to give them the benefit of the doubt, those Peters in our life. We need to encourage them to do the right thing even after they've made mistakes. We need to have the 70 times 7 mindset. Lord, 7 times? As if that was going to be a lie. And he wasn't putting 490 times as the limit on that, but he said 70 times 7. So as many times as they asked for it. What about lepers in the New Testament? Who touched them? Who talked to them? Who wanted to be around them? No one. No one wanted to be around them. But how did our Lord treat them? He interacted with them. He touched them. He healed them. He even instructed them. So when we think about those that are a little bit less than desirable in society that no one wants to be around, we need to fill in the gap. And those that get left out, you think about the emotional lift and the confidence that any of us can give to those that most people pull back from. Whether they be socially awkward, whether they be a person with a disability, maybe it's a widow, maybe it's an outcast. But by interacting with them and showing them love, people notice that. People notice it. This is the type that we're talking about maturing toward agape love. What about Paul? Paul killed Christians. He broke up homes. He sent people to prison for proclaiming Christ. And we need to love our enemies. Jesus would ask God to forgive those that put him on the cross. Do you think about that? When we deal with our enemies, do we have this perfected love that would allow us to want the very best for everyone, regardless of their circumstance? That's what agape love is. Then he would enlist Paul in his gospel army. You think about this, I know they didn't have that, but for the illustration, he would have been on the top 10 most wanted list for hating Christians. The Christians would have known who Paul is, and he was turned, because of the love of Christ, he was turned from a murderous foe into one of the greatest soldiers of Christ's gospel army. He suffered much for the cause of Christ, and we can see through Paul that he had a truly sacrificial love, but what motivated that was Jesus and his sacrificial love. So how should we treat our enemies? Sometimes I think that we think if we just avoid them, or we don't do anything wrong to them, or we don't say anything wrong about them, then we're okay. But that's not what Jesus was teaching us. Paul would write in Romans 12:20, if they're hungry, you feed them. If they're thirsty, you give them a drink. Have we achieved that with our agape love? Is that the way that we view our enemies? Matthew 5:44, Jesus would say to pray for them. And a lot of times I think that if we just left it there, maybe, I'll pray for them, and it's imprecatory prayer. And what that means is I'm wishing that God would take out his vengeance on them because they're evildoers. That's not what he was talking about here. He wants good things to happen to them in a way that they do not expect, is the way God said, or Jesus said, to treat our enemies. Let's look at Luke 6. It's a little bit of an extended passage, 27 through 36, but I want us to incorporate this into our thinking about loving our enemies. Jesus said, but I say to you who hear, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you, and pray for those who spitefully use you. To him who strikes you on the one cheek, offer the other also. And from him who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who asks of you. And from him who takes away your goods, do not ask them back. And just as you want men to do to you, you also do to them likewise. But if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you hope to receive back, what credit is that to you? For even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much back. But love your enemies. Do good and lend, hoping for nothing in return. And your reward will be great. And you will be sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the unthankful and evil. Therefore be merciful, just as your Father also is merciful. Why is it so hard for us? When we read through that, that's the goal, that's what we're growing, but we fail in that many times. I think a lot of it has to do with we don't truly believe that our reward will be great. But that's what he just said. If we will do those things, expecting nothing in return, that our reward will be great. How? I don't really know. In providential ways, I know that I'm blessed. So why aren't I better at loving my enemy? Well, I should be. Whatever someone has ever done to me or to you, I can guarantee that it wasn't worse than what they did to Jesus. Let that sink in for just a moment. There's nothing in my life that has ever happened to me that is worse than what they did to Jesus. And what did he say? Love your enemies. Know that people are watching and that they see us. And they take notice of kindness, especially if they know it's a rival. We should expect something different. We should show something different. How do I know that people take notice about things that are done to rivals and they make an impact on us? I know you've seen the clips. They post them all the time. There's a kid that's maybe a manager who didn't make the team, or maybe there's some disability with him, and they allow him to get into the game. And he scores a bucket or he scores a touchdown. And it was the enemies, the rivals, that were allowing it to happen or even helping it to happen. How did it impact us to be able to see the enemy doing good? It does. We all love those type stories. The world does that as well. They take notice when we're kind to our enemies. Jesus' love for one of Christianity's greatest enemies was tremendously impactful for the cause, talking about Paul. Why? Why did Paul convert? We're talking about the most complete 180-degree turn that a person has ever made in their life, because Jesus showed agape love toward him. What about Judas? This is an impactful thought. We do not see Jesus ever being unkind to Judas. And he knew the whole time. Even before he met him, he knew. And if there's ever an example to think about how we should treat people, we need to look at the way Jesus treated Judas. What apostle knew Judas was a traitor? Have you ever thought about that? None of them. Why? Because Jesus treated them all the same, with love and with kindness. And he continued to try to teach all of them. He had the same amount of patience with all of them. But they didn't know. Remember when Jesus knelt down, girded up his loins, and grabbed the towel and washed the feet of the disciples? Judas was one of them. He hasn't gone yet. Jesus washed Judas's feet. He called him friend. That should leave an impression on us. Judas was in the circle to show the depth of God's love for man. That there is no one that is so bad that they don't have the opportunity to hear the gospel. In this case, it was to be around Jesus. He also had a tax collector and a zealot in his circle. And if you know anything about that political climate, the tax collectors were collecting taxes for Rome, and some of them were Jewish. Well, the zealot was an insurrectionist. He wanted to throw off the Roman rule. And here Jesus has one zealot on one side and a tax collector on the other in his inner circle. But we don't read anywhere where Matthew and Simon had problems. I'm not saying that they didn't, but we don't read about them. We don't have Jesus having to correct them. Why? Because they understood the love that Christ had for man. They were serving a greater good, and so we don't read about those. Agape love would demand unity regardless of their political background or their social views. It should be the same with us. All right, what's another aspect that we can consider? Love one another is to a great degree. We already talked a little bit about agape being the highest degree. In 1 Peter 1:22, Peter would write, "Since you have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit in sincere love of the brethren, love one another fervently with a pure heart." So now we're starting to extend this, right? There's some qualifiers in what Peter just wrote. In the first place, he did say love one another. So it's not just about loving God. It's not just about loving ourselves or maybe our immediate family. He was telling them to love one another. All right, what's the next qualifier? He said fervently. This is intense, a very intense action that's going on here. We've heard a lot of people describe it as this word being used to boil over, right? A lot of activity and effort going here. But it means to put forth power. Literally what it means is to stretch out the hand. And what I imagine is someone going over a cliff and maybe they catch a root on the way over and they're hanging on for dear life. And I come to the edge of the cliff and with every fiber of my being, I'm stretching out to grab a hold of them and pull them back to safety. That's fervently. That's fervently. That's urgency. And it does take effort on our part. It shows how much we care. And he said that you love one another fervently, lastly, with a pure heart. And one purified by fire is the idea here. And when I put precious metals into a fire, it burns off the impurities. They aren't there anymore to get in the way of me trying to love someone the way Jesus loved them, because those impurities no longer exist. This kind of love toward brethren is far greater than the other terms that we find in the Greek language. Even more than the other Greek forms, storge, which is a family love, Philadelphia, which is a friendly or brotherly love, and eros, which is a romantic love. Agape exceeds all of these. Remember, it's a choice. The definition that I like to use is wanting the very best for every person, regardless of their circumstance. So I don't have any other factors to determine whether I want the greatest good for a person or not. I want it for them all. The enemy, the disloyal friend, the one that's hard to get along with, the one that gives bad advice, the one that loves me, all of them the same. I want the very best for them. In John 15, 12 through 14, Jesus makes this even more of a higher degree for us in the love that we show for other people. What's the extent of the love for friends? Let's look at John 15, verses 12 through 14. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. You are my friends if you do whatever I command you. We've gone up a few notches here right now. Jesus is saying that if you love the way I love, you will be willing to lay down your life. We know Jesus made good on his promise of that end, but what about us? Would we really be willing to lay down our life for one of our brethren? Not our children, not our spouse. One of our brethren, to that degree. Sometimes it's hard for us to lay down a meal or a $20 bill for brethren. But he's saying, if you're going to love like me, you would have to be willing to give your life for a brother or a sister. Now, I don't think that we'll ever be into those, but that's the mindset. Because if we would be willing to do that, then we're willing to do the simpler things. Like even give the benefit of the doubt. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I've loved you. This could have been in our commandment section too, but I thought that it fit here because it's showing the higher degree. In the passage, he says a friend will lay down his life, and that's where we should be with that. Love also doesn't show partiality. James deals with this in chapter 2, verses 1 through 9. He talks about socioeconomic differences in this particular one. But the point he makes about any partiality is, if we are partial to another, we sin. That's what he said in verse 9, that showing partiality is a sin. And God doesn't show partiality because God is love. We shouldn't care about what race or what gender or what economic status, because we love. And again, we'll go back to this several times. The definition is wanting the best for the person regardless of circumstance, right? So it doesn't matter who they are. I don't separate them that way. We don't give preferences to those who look and talk exactly like us. What bothers us and what makes us ineffective in evangelism is we like to stay in that comfort zone of being around people that look and talk like us. Same thing, the gender and the race and the economic status. We need to get out of those boxes if we're truly going to fulfill the Great Commission. And agape love allows us to do that. Because when I meet a person, regardless who they are, I want the very best for them. Well, how am I going to do that? I'll do whatever it takes to be able to get an avenue to them to sit down and study the Bible, bring them to Christ. Show them what agape love is all about. All right, love one another expects, or is to a higher degree, but it also expects growth. 1 Thessalonians 3:12, and may the Lord make you increase and abound in your love. So he's talking about expected growth. Increase and abound in your love to one another and to all, just as we do to you. He's putting forth the example. So that he may establish your hearts blameless in holiness before our God and Father at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and with all his saints. And then in the next chapter, he would say, but concerning brotherly love, you have no need that I should write to you, for you yourselves are taught by God to love one another. And indeed you do so toward all the brethren who are in all of Macedonia. But we urge you, brethren, that you increase more and more. There's our expected growth. That you also aspire to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business, and to work with your own hands, as we commanded you, that you may walk properly toward those who are outside, that you may lack nothing. So did you see what happened when Paul's writing here? He said, look, I know that you love the brethren in the congregation. He said, I don't have to write to you about that. But then he says to all those in Macedonia. So I would think he's talking about other congregations, that agape love would be shown to them. But then in the end, what did he say the purpose was? He said that you may walk properly toward those who are outside. So we practice and we perfect here to where we're able to show that to those that are outside the body of Christ. Philippians 1, 9 through 11. And this I pray, that your love may abound still more and more. See, we're talking about expected growth again. In knowledge and all discernment, that you may approve the things that are excellent, that you may be sincere and without offense till the day of Christ, being filled with the fruits of righteousness which are by Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God. And the point that I want to make about the growth here is, when does it end? Is there ever a time that any of us as Christians can say, I have done it, I have mastered agape love? It doesn't seem like it. Paul said that you'll do this without offense until when? Until Christ comes back. So it's ongoing. Abound more and more. That phrase shows up several times with the New Testament, specifically talking about their agape. Not phileo, not storge. And eros isn't in the New Testament, but it is a Greek word for love. So here's the working portion of everything that we're working up to. We realize that it was commanded. We realize that it needs to be to a greater degree than all of the other loves. We realize that we need to continue to grow until Christ comes back in that. So really the important question, and makes this a useful lesson, is how do I work on that? How do I do it? Because if you're telling me that we're expected to work toward being mature and complete and perfect in love, how do I practically do that? Well, 1 John 2:5 says, but whoever keeps his word, truly the love of God is perfected in him. By this, we know that we are in him. So it should be our goal. It should be our expectation. And I think that just about any preacher that would ever preach or teach on love one another is eventually going to find their way to 1 Corinthians 13. And that's where I want to spend the rest of our time. And we'll be looking at verses 4 through 8. And this is the way that we're going to do this. We look at 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 8, and the word that is used is love. And that's our word agape that we've been talking about tonight. And it has all of these things that love does and does not do. Well, I don't do damage to the scriptures when I think about 1 John 4:8 that says God is love. So, when I read 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8, everywhere that I see love, or in some versions charity, I can replace it with God, and it remains true, right? God suffers long. God is kind. God doesn't parade himself. God's not puffed up. Bears, believes, endures. God does all those things. Okay? Well, Jesus is the Son of God. He is deity himself. So I would do no damage to the scripture now to go back through verses 4 through 8 and put Jesus in there. That Jesus is all those things. Is he long-suffering? Yes. Is he kind? Yes. Does he parade himself around? We never saw that. Does he puff himself up? No. So I would do no damage to that. Okay, well, if those two things are true of God and his son Jesus, then they should be true for his followers, should they not? Talked about all the time how Jesus is the example for us. Well, I'm a Christian. So now if I really want to get personal, when I really want to build a work list, I'll put my name in there. And I should be able to go through these verses, and I should be able to say, Cody suffers long. Cody is kind. Cody doesn't parade himself. Cody doesn't is not puffed up. And you would do the same for you. So let's look at it. Love suffers long. How long is that? I don't know that anybody's ever talked about definitions of long suffering and put a quantitative number on that. How long is long suffering? Long as it takes. That's the definition I'll give you. Long suffering is as long as it takes. We'll suffer long with our children for them to learn valuable things in life. It might even be practicing on how to hit a baseball. But do we show that kind of long suffering toward everyone? Right? Agape love, I want the best for everyone regardless of circumstance. So suffering long and being patient as long as it takes. I have the power to retaliate, so I don't. But I don't. I don't always have to have the last word. That's this word, long suffering. Cody suffers long. God did. Jesus did. Christians should. Do I? Love is kind. Ephesians 4:32 says, be kind to one another. So that, alongside of loving, is a command. You know, the next thing that I have written on here is that frequent sarcasm can override kindness. I like sarcasm and dry humor. But I know that if I'm always in that space of sarcasm, it gets old. And there are a lot of people that don't understand the line between joking and being mean. And so we should be very careful about those things. And sarcasm is the one to me that fits into this kindness. What about love does not envy? I know God doesn't. I know Jesus doesn't. I know Christians shouldn't. But do I? I can celebrate what makes other people happy, even though it's not that big of a deal to me. That's this word envy. It also has to deal that I don't want what others have so bad that I'll do anything to get it from them or one like it. Right? There's no distinction in that type of envying. You think about the prodigal son. When he came home, the older brother wasn't able to rejoice. He should have been able to do that. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up. And I put these two together because they are related. They just come in a different direction. One is the does not parade itself. That's where I'm going around fishing for compliments, fishing for people to recognize me for all the great things that I do in life. Now, this place wouldn't run if I wasn't around. You know, that kind of thing, that they're seeking credit and attention for themselves. And I would submit to you that that's where arrogance takes seat. Now, puffed up is different because now this comes, I didn't solicit it, but now the compliments and the recognition and the credit are coming to me, and I don't handle it the right way. I'm puffed up by it. And now I'm thinking of myself more than I ought to. Does not behave rudely. Now, I know that we've already covered being kind, but in the times that we're kind, it doesn't cover up the times that we're rude. So love doesn't behave rudely. Not rude when we're frustrated with a server in a restaurant, or a cashier or a customer service rep that's got my order or my bill wrong. I'm not rude. We should resolve conflict without being rude. And the way that we gauge this in our house is the interaction occurs at the restaurant or the HEB checkout, and the family member that wants to hold you accountable says, go ask them for a Bible study. Go invite them to church. And if you can't do that, then you didn't handle that situation the right way. There is no reason for a Christian to ever be rude, even in conflict, even in frustration. Does not seek its own. This one I think happens in the workplace a lot. We put our own interest above the company's interest or above other employees' interest, especially if I might be in competition with them for a promotion, or we want someone to recognize every good deed that we do. And that attitude leads to selfishness in other ways, and it breaks down your ability to influence others in the workplace. If they know that you put yourself before the company or before the good of other team members, you won't have influence with them. Love does not seek its own. Unselfishness is a learned behavior. Think about that for a minute, because then what I'll tell you is, if you don't believe that, think about a baby that's hungry in a dirty diaper. They have to learn unselfishness. Love is not provoked. This means to irritate or to arouse anger. Sometimes a lot of the young people talk about rage baiting, right? They're doing it intentionally. That's this word, is not provoked. So if you're trying to rage bait me, I'm not going to fall for it, but flip that on its head. Why are you going around trying to rage bait people? Love doesn't do that. Anger is a gateway to a multitude of sins, most of them with our thoughts and with our mouth, and some of them even with our fists. And we should avoid those. Love is able to stay calm and reason through issues. And when we're stirred up to anger, we don't think straight. And we say things later on that we know we would have never said. And so we need to be not be provoked. People that are mad are the worst debaters because they throw logic out the window, and oftentimes they just pour gasoline on the fire through name calling. We should stay away from those. This next one's an interesting one. Love thinks no evil. And a lot of times the first thing that comes to mind is, okay, all those things that could be sinful in my life or could be a trap for me, I'm not supposed to think about those. Whether they be drugs and alcohol or pornography or things of those nature, and we think, okay, yeah, we're not supposed to think evil. That's not really this word, even though that is a good thing. This is giving people the benefit of the doubt, and it's one of life's greatest challenges. So many times we've convinced ourselves things that may not necessarily be true. Oh, I know why he didn't speak to me. Oh, I know why she did that. She did it on purpose. And those things may not be true. She only said that because and we can finish whatever the scenario is. And most of the time, those things that we've cooked up in our head are not true. But what they have done is cause a roadblock in our relationships. It's not agape love, because love thinks no evil. And then when you look further into this word, the word thinks no evil is really kin to the thought of taking inventory. And so, quite plainly, love is not an accountant who keeps score on the ledger. You did this to me, I do this to you. Oh, they did this and this and this. I can't wait to bring that out. Love is not an archaeologist who digs up the things that have long been buried. Love is not a historian who points out the past. Does not rejoice in iniquity, but it rejoices in the truth. Simply means that love is not happy about sin. Love bears all things. It's an idea of protection and security. When African antelope herds are attacked, they all scatter. It's every man for himself. But this word, bear all things, more of protection and security, is like the musk oxen, where they put their young in the middle and then they run a circle around them. That's bears all things. We can do this by keeping things to ourselves. Believes all things. It believes the best in people. It doesn't mean you have to believe lies. It doesn't mean that you're gullible. But it believes the very best. Hopes all things. This is the one that we really should think about, because if love is wanting the best for everyone regardless of their circumstance, then we want that person to obtain salvation. And we'll do anything to get there. That's why we can set all these things that we're talking about aside tonight to be able to ultimately bring them to Christ. And love endures all things. There's nothing on this earth that should make me decide to walk away from the church. Why? Because I know the love of God. I know the love that his son had when he gave himself on the cross. And I know the love of the church that has been with me through hard times before. There is nothing that will make me leave, because love endures all things. And then the last phrase that it makes is love never fails. And if it does, then we've done it wrong. And what we need to do is constantly go back through this list that we find in verses 4 through 8. And the ones that tweak us when we say it, and if we're honest, they do, those are the ones we need to work on. Love one another so the world knows that we belong to him. Appreciate your time and attention.